give this talk, I asked the question, what do you think the major part of the audience is going to be most concerned about? And this is the answer I received. Get back in here. Mostly they'll be 18 to 23-year-olds, and they'll be university students. Their concerns maybe be about career consulting, how to deal with upcoming work life, adaptation to organizational culture, and becoming a leader for the next step. Now, I very much appreciated that answer, because if you asked me that question about a group of people at the University of Michigan, I would give you the same answer. That is, these are very universal concerns for students across the world. And this is what I'd like to address today, is this concern. And the focus will be on higher purpose. And I'd like to begin with a personal case. I think it's one that people in their 20s can understand fully. I had a daughter. She was getting older, and she started to care about getting married. But she began to complain that she couldn't find the kind of people she was looking for, because she was now getting older and the market had dried up. She was getting somewhat depressed about this, when all of a sudden she met a man that she was very attracted to. So the bells were ringing and the romance was there, and Prince Charming was available, and life was good. She was a happy camper. About 3 months went by, and one day I walked into my wife's office. She was on the phone, and I immediately knew she was talking to our daughter. I also knew that something had happened that my daughter did not interpret as a good thing. And as I listened, it became clear. This fellow had just dumped her, just ended the relationship. And she was devastated. She talked to her mother for a while, and then she made an announcement. And I'd like to put the announcement in perspective. I think all firstborn children tend to have a common characteristic. When they're miserable, they want you to be miserable too. And she made an announcement. The announcement was, I'm coming home this weekend. I thought, oh no. Her mother hung up and said, you're the father, you go to the airport and pick her up. So the next day I drove to the airport. She got in the car. She didn't say hello, how are you, or anything like that. She started in, that no good, dirty, da, 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 da. And about 5 minutes later, she took a breath. When she took a breath, I said, are you problem solving or are you purpose finding? She didn't even hear me. She went on for another 5 minutes. Well, this cycle repeated itself 3 or 4 times. And finally, we were pulling into the driveway at my house when she took a breath again. And I said, are you problem solving or purpose finding? And she stopped and she looked at me and she said, what are you talking about? And I said, well, last week I wrote a letter to your brother about problem solving versus purpose finding. I sent you a copy. She then said, this is the real world. That's the way children talk to professor parents. By then we're in the house. I said, well, I think this does pertain to the real world. And I reached into my file cabinet and I pulled out a piece of paper. And on the piece of paper, it said, Robert Quinn, life statement. And I started to hand it to her. She ripped it out of my hand and she started to read. And she got kind of quiet. And then she looked up and she said, when you feel bad, you read this? And I said, no. When I feel bad, I rewrite it. It's been rewritten hundreds of times. She looked at it again. She said, yeah, I can hardly understand some of this stuff. I said, yes, it's been written to a customized audience of one. And then the first miracle occurred. She looked up again and said, do you think I could write one of these? And I said, I am sure you can. Now, the miracle was she then disappeared into another room and stayed there for a day and a half and worked on her life statement. And the miracle was I did not have to suffer for that day and a half. She came out. She seemed very changed. She got on a plane. She flew back to where she lived. And then the second miracle occurred. She sent me an email. She said, he called me. I said, oh, this is going to be interesting. So she described the phone call, and she said, after the phone call, I wrote him a letter. And in the email, she shared the letter. As I read the letter, I was astounded. The letter was incredibly authentic and vulnerable. She said, when I first met you, I felt this. In the middle of the relationship, I was feeling this. When you dumped me, I felt this. And it was incredibly honest. And then she said in the email, but my roommates said, you can't give this letter to him. Now we might just pause for a moment and ask ourselves, why would the roommates say you can't give this letter to him? And after a few moments, I think the answer becomes very obvious. You see, dating is a marketplace. You know, it's like being in the business school or school at all. We're competing for grades. Well, in dating, we're competing for attention. And this guy just dumped her. And her roommate said, you don't share your feelings with someone who just dumped you. And that would be very common logic. You see, in our organizations, we don't tell the truth to the boss. We filter everything we say. Organizations have lots of problems because people don't tell the truth. Then in the email, there was an astounding statement. My daughter said, what my roommates don't understand is that what he thinks doesn't matter. Now, wait a minute. 3 days before, what he thought caused her life to shatter. Now she's saying what he thinks doesn't matter. You see, this statement that I've written, that I've included in the letter, is who I really am. What he thinks doesn't matter. It doesn't change who I really am. Well, this was pretty astounding. She was saying, I have moved from an external locus of control, worrying about what people think of me, to an internal locus of control that orbits around my highest purpose. Well, the story doesn't end there. It has a very strange ending. In the next few weeks, at work, she was promoted. And a short time later, she was promoted again. Now, this is a story about dating. What could it possibly have to do with work and getting promoted? And the answer is everything. You see, she was still going to work in the same building. She was wearing the same clothes. She had the same body, but she wasn't the same person. She was now a very different person. And that organization needed leadership. You see, organizations are starved for leaders. They can't get leaders. They get managers, not leaders. And they're starved for leaders. And suddenly, she's getting promoted. It's a story about dating. It ends up with her getting promoted because you and I believe work is here and personal life is here, and they're two different worlds. When in fact, there's only one you. And you take that same you wherever you go. So suddenly, this young woman who was crushed because she was externally rejected is suddenly living very differently And even her work performance has changed. Her whole life has changed. Now, let's talk science. My friend, Vic Strecker, published this book a few years ago. In it, he did a literature review of the studies on personal purpose. The findings create a very interesting pattern. Let's go through the findings. People who have an attempt to live a higher purpose add years to their life. They live longer than other people. They reduce the risk of heart attack and stroke. They cut the risk of Alzheimer's by more than half. They are able to relax during the day. They're able to sleep better at night. It doubles your chance of staying drug or alcohol free after treatment. That is, if you have an addiction, you go in for treatment and you've been living a purpose-driven life, you recover faster. It activates your immune system, your killer cells, and then diminishes your inflammatory cells. It increases your good cholesterol. It gives you better sex. It gives you more friends. It gives you more happiness. It gives you deeper engagement in life. Now, since that book was written, there have been more studies done. The list gets longer and longer. One of the most recent said, if you have a higher purpose, you make more money over the course of your lifetime than someone who doesn't. Now, when I look at this list, it holds my attention. I say, wait a minute, that's a lot of positive outcomes. This suggests to me that if this science is true, you and I are designed to be purpose-seeking mechanisms. We live in a state of well-being, or we're more likely to live in a state of well-being, if we know the purpose of our lives and we organize our lives to that purpose. It changes the nature of our life experience. My close friend Kim Cameron just published a new book in which he reviewed the literature on contributive goals. Basically, there are two kinds of goals. There are ego goals, self-interested goals, the kind I seek all day long. And then there are contributive goals. They're goals when I give myself away, when I transcend my ego. And in that literature review, he says, contributive goals foster positive relational energy. They improve social, cognitive, and physical performance. People are rated by others as more competent. It improves well-being, self-efficacy, hope, and people are less depressed. It reduces blood pressure. It improves mortality risk. So again, we live longer. Avoidance of depression after a major loss. Increased commitment to an organization. Inclined to increase in pro-social behaviors, which is the same thing. That is the giving the way of self. These are two highly related lists. Now let's think about purpose for a minute. Sociology tells us that the past determines the present. Today, I'm talking to you in English because in the past, that's a language I learned. I'm wearing this shirt because it was in my closet this morning. That is, the past determines the present. Sociologists are rather strong about this. Now, here's a radical question, a crazy question. When does the future determine the present? When does the future determine the present? Because that violates sociology. Well, there's an answer. I'm anchored in my past. So I go through life dragging this anchor with me. Now, what this literature suggests is I could pick that anchor up out of my past and throw it into the future. Now, the way we throw our anchor into the future is we set a goal. When we sincerely set and commit to a goal, our behavior immediately changes. If I determine to go to college when I'm in the 10th grade and my neighbor doesn't have that goal, we behave differently. When I anchor myself in a higher purpose, I am anchoring myself to transcend the constraints of the past. I begin to behave in new ways. It changes me. Now, how in the world do we go about finding our purpose? We've done work with thousands of people on this issue, and there are some things that are fairly predictable. If you put people to work, they will tend to come up with some fairly superficial answers. On this slide are two sets of answers. I'm going to give you a minute just to read these purpose statements, and then I'll talk about them. So I'm going to give you just a few seconds to read these statements. Now, I think you'll notice a difference between the ones on the left and the ones on the right. I have a good friend who's helped 15,000 people find their life purpose. When he's working with them, he pushes them very hard to think deeply and then to connect to meaningful moments in their lives and to find a metaphor that captures their life purpose. For example, catalyzing people who build kites to build rockets. That's a purpose statement written by a woman from your area of the world who is a senior executive in Unilever. And as she took it, she was very cynical about the process. And then all of a sudden, something started to happen to her as he had her search her history. And one of the points in her life that she ended up talking about was a day when she and her friends were out flying kites. And her father came, and her father said, "Would you like to learn to build rockets?" And her friend said yes. And so this little group of children began to work on building rockets. It had a tremendous impact on both her and her friends. And as she reflected back on this and connected it to other aspects of her life, she said, "That's what I'm about. I'm a facilitator of change. When people are underutilizing their potential, flying kites, my goal in life is to help them fly rockets." The impact on her of coming to that statement was profound. At the end, I'll share a slide with you where you can actually go listen to her talk about what it did to her life. Her story is astounding. I fight the good fight and blow your hair back. Another woman who went back to a point in her life and found this image. She's later promoted. She was working at the top of one mid-sized company. And then she was noticed by a CEO who offered her a job to be the head of corporate communications in a very big company. A few weeks later, he came to her and he offered her to be the director of one of their major businesses. She accepted the job. There was one downside to the job. The last 8 people who held that job had been fired. Everyone failed. She immediately got on planes and flew around the world talking to people in various outlet stores, and then came back and put together a plan. And when she suggested her plan to the CEO, he said, "No, We're not going to do that. Now, she was devastated. She went home. She got very depressed. And then she looked up on the wall where this statement was posted: I fight the good fight and I blow your hair back. The next morning, she went in. She walked into the CEO's office and she said, now the reason they fired 8 people is they were losing millions of dollars a year. She said to him, do you want to lose millions of dollars this year? He said, no, I do not. She said, do you have a plan that's better than my plan? He said, no, I don't. That's your job. She said, we're going to implement this plan. And we're going to turn this business around. Now, the reason 8 people have been fired is because you don't have the courage as CEO to make the change that needs to be made. What needs to be made is very painful for you. And you need to endure that pain and make that change. And that's what I'm going to do. So either fire me now or don't fire me. If you don't fire me, this is what I'm going to do. When I met that woman, she had just turned around that business. It was making a profit for the first time in a number of years. Well, that's the way the story goes. As you go down this list, these statements on the right are very meaningful statements to some very real human beings. My own statements up there, that is, I can reduce my entire life to 3 words: inspire, positive, change. And I can talk for 2 hours about each of those 3 words. When I say those words, inspire, positive, change, it immediately changes my normal condition. I think differently, I feel differently, I begin to act differently. Now those are very interesting words. A professor is supposed to be an expert. Professor gets up and pours out facts. That is, a professor's an instructor. Well, I'm a professor. I do science. I gather facts. But I don't believe that's good enough. I believe my purpose is to inspire positive change. My job is to take someone who doesn't want to learn and inspire them to hunger to learn. Those 3 words are magical for me. It took an enormous amount of work to find those 3 words. Well, so it goes with these other statements. That's what I think a life statement or statement of purpose looks like. Let's talk about the criteria. It's simple: inspire positive change. It's based in your strengths, not in your weaknesses, in your strengths. That's very important. It's contributive. It's not an acquisition. People say, well, my goal is to graduate from college. My goal is to get a good job. My goal is to make money. My goal is to be famous. Every one of those statements is centered in the ego. Every one of those statements is about acquiring money, power, fame. A purpose statement is about giving yourself away, making a positive contribution and change in the world. It is absolutely authentic. If it just comes from your head, it's not going to do anything. If it comes from your head and your heart, I take people who fly kites and teach them build rockets. That woman's speaking from her heart. That's an authentic statement. It's universal. It's not specific. It can govern your entire life. In fact, I often talk about the fact that a purpose is the arbiter of every decision. I do a lot of work with a colleague who's a world famous economist. He's become deeply embedded in our purpose research. One day he called me, he said, I had the most interesting experience. He said, I received an email from China I was invited to come to China and meet with people at the highest level and help them formulate policy. And they were going to pay me a very large fee. I got it late at night. So I thought, well, I'll answer it in the morning. But he knew what the answer was. You don't pass up an opportunity like that. He said, I got up in the morning and I thought, well, what's my purpose? And he stated his purpose to himself. He went to the office and he typed a message. I'm sorry, I cannot come to China. And he said to me, never in my life would I have imagined turning down that opportunity. But now, because he has a purpose that he really believes in, he's saying no to things that he would normally say yes to. When you have a higher purpose, it puts you on the path less traveled by. Let me just illustrate that. About a month ago, I was talking to the CEO of a Fortune 25 company. So this is a big deal, very powerful man. He told me a very simple story, but it's unforgettable. He said, I was an engineer. I was so smart, but no one would listen to me. Well, I knew why they wouldn't listen to me. I didn't know how to make money. So I decided to go get an MBA. I told my poor wife, you're going to have to give up this nice house. We're going to go live in student housing at the university. I'm going to spend 2 years getting an MBA. And he did. He got a job at a big company. They bought a new house. She was very happy. That was on Monday. On Friday, he met with his assigned mentor, a person from a higher level who was supposed to coach him. He came home on Friday night and he said, sweetheart, would you feel bad if we sold this house? She said, what are you talking about? He said, well, I met with my mentor today. And he said, if you want to get along in this company, you got to keep your mouth shut and keep your head down. That's how you get ahead around here. And she said, you're going to quit? And he was shocked when she said that. He said, quit? No, I'm not going to quit. I'm going to get fired. I'm going to do the right thing until they fire me. That's what my father taught me. Now that's really, really, really interesting. Because someone who's externally directed would say, yes, of course, you keep your head down, you keep your mouth shut. That's how you live in a hierarchy. But he can't do that. So he says, I'm going to get fired. And then he told me that decision took me to the chair of the CEO. Now, do you see the power in that story? He turned not to his ego, but his conscience. That's a moral turn. And he chose to take the path less traveled by. Everybody else is on the path of least resistance. He's on a chosen path, a purposeful path. And it puts him into a different developmental trajectory. And he ends up being the CEO. Now, he could have been fired, but he wasn't. When you have a purpose and it becomes the arbiter of every decision, you say no to China. You say no to the mentor who wants you to conform. You say no to things other people don't say no to. It's inspiring. When I told you that I say the 3 words, inspire positive change, I change. How do I change? I immediately have new vision because I was thinking reactively. The moment I say the words, I'm thinking proactively. My emotions change. That makes my thoughts change. That makes my behavior change. It's transformative. That young engineer MBA was transformed into a CEO because it's taking you somewhere in life. Now, What's the process? Here are several exercises that you might think about doing that could help you in the process of finding your purpose. Number one, simple exercise, list the 10 best things that ever happened to you. Now list the 10 worst things that ever happened to you. Now the first list is fun. When you start to write the second list, it gets depressing, all those horrible experiences. But then here's a transformational question. What has life prepared you to contribute that no one else can contribute? That is, that question takes both lists and transforms them. Your great experiences, your good experiences have been preparing you for something. Your terrible experiences have also been preparing you for something. It's made you unique. What is that uniqueness? What has life been preparing you to do? Second exercise. At the top of a page, you simply write the words, I am, colon, and then you put the numbers 1 to 20 below that. And you give yourself 3 minutes to give 20 answers. Now, let me tell you what you're going to do when you start that exercise. You're going to write down, I'm a mother, I'm a professor, I'm a student, I'm an uncle, I work at such and such a place. Now, those answers just roll off your pen. And all those answers are roles. Being a brother, a mother, a professor, or a student, those are all roles, expectation sets from the external world. When you get to number 9, 10, 11, 14, somewhere in there, your pen stops because you can't think of any more roles. And then you start to freeze. And then all of a sudden, you start to write very different things, and they're not roles. And in those sentences, there's a lot of data about who you are and what your purpose might be. The third one, as I look at all those 20 things on my first list, what were the 3 single most important challenges of my life, times when I was stretched to my extreme? And what did I do? How did I get through those 3 great challenges? When I tell those 3 stories, what do they have in common? What do those commonalities tell me about who I really am? Because it's often in extremity that you find your best self. What are my 3 greatest successes? As you lay those out, what's common? That is, what are your superpowers? What are your most unique strengths? What do you do that most people can't do? Are you an absolute genius at mathematical analysis? Are you off the scale in showing empathy to other human beings? Are you able to see the future other people can't see? What are your superpowers? People say, I don't have any. Do the exercise. You do have them. What are they? When you do those kinds of exercises, the thing to do is to sit down and force yourself, give yourself about 90 seconds, no more, and write the first draft of your purpose statement. And it doesn't matter how bad it is. You just write it. And then every day you take 1, 2, 3 minutes and you write it again, changing at least one word. And it may take 7 days or 21 days or 43 days. But one day you'll write it, you'll jump out of your seat, run to whoever's closest and say, look at this. When that passion is there, you know you found it. my good friend that's helped the 15,000 people do purpose statements, his purpose statement is, my purpose is to bring you home and wake you up. When you find your purpose, you feel like you're home and you feel fully awake, fully energized. Write that draft statement, rewrite it regularly. And then once you have it, organize your life to it. Okay, one closing case, and then if you have some questions, I'll be glad to take questions. I don't know how we're doing on time. Yeah, we have some time. I go all over, 20 years ago, at the University of Michigan, Jane Dutton, Kim Cameron, and I started a new field of study. We called it positive organizational scholarship. We called in several hundred scholars in a conference, and we said, social science is biased. And they said, no, social science is objective. We said, no, it's biased. They said, how is it biased? We said, it's biased towards central tendency, the middle of the normal curve. That is, social science is very good at telling us what's normal and about deviance from the norm, about problems and how to solve them. They said, yeah, we are good at that. So what's the problem? And we said, the problem is you're missing a huge portion of reality. You see, there's the middle of the curve. That's normal behavior. There's the left side of the curve. That's negative behavior. What we're missing is the entire right side of the curve. There's a question that we don't know how to answer. What do individuals, groups, and organizations look like at their very best? What are the dynamics of excellence? Not of mediocrity and not of decline, but of growth. What are those dynamics? Now, hundreds of people began to take up that challenge. A field was born, and over the last 20 years, many, many studies have been done. As I look across those studies, there are principles that are very powerful, and I go around the world teaching positive leadership and positive organization. Very senior executives sit on the edge of their seat and they drink it in. They're really interested. And then at the end of the week, I say, now, what are you going to go home and do differently that you've never done before? And a look comes over their face. It's a look of terror. These very well-paid, highly educated human beings are terrified of the notion of instituting positive leadership. Why is that? Now, it's not just the senior executives. It's virtually everyone. If I'm talking to a diverse group, people who don't hold high positions, they inevitably will say at the end of the presentation, these are such wonderful ideas. It's a shame I can't institute them. You see, I work in this kind of an organization, fill in the blank, or I have this boss, this monster boss. That is, the human race learns from the time before we're 2 years old, a theory. And the theory is reinforced at every moment. And the theory is captured. I don't even have to use words to describe the theory. I can just show you a picture. And the picture's on this slide. It's that red pyramid. That's the theory of social life that we live by. When your mother said, because I told you so, you learned about authority. When you went to kindergarten and you met the bully, you learned about social dynamics. When you went to middle school and you had to pick a place to sit in the lunchroom, and you looked at that social marketplace that was so frightening, you were learning this theory. When you went to high school and began to consider dating, you were considering this theory. When you go to college, every lecture that you hear has invisible assumptions underneath the lecture. Man or woman is a self-interested, rational actor. Resources are scarce. Conflict is inevitable. People filter information. Decisions are under-optimized. Organizations underperform. We have a dark and gloomy theory of social life. It's based on competition. It's based on social exchange. And it governs everything we do. If we're driving home tonight and we go on a freeway and some other driver cuts us off, we become enraged. Why do we become enraged? Because that other driver violated a social contract. That was unjust behavior. That theory dominates our lives, our organizations, everything we experience. That's the middle of the curve theory. When we transcend those assumptions, we discover another whole realm of social life. I call it social excellence. People can't even entertain the notions because it's so threatening. Well, people come to me constantly at the end of a lecture and say, this is why I can't do it. That's learned helplessness. I had one student come and he made this statement. I wanted to get my graduate degree in creative writing. My father wanted me to get an MBA. I just secured a job at the bottom of the pyramid. There's no way I can live from my purpose and be authentic in the job I'll be in. So he's going into a financial organization. He knows what the culture's like. He knows that he's going to be a first level manager. He says, I can't have an authentic purpose. Now, I sat down with him for nearly an hour. And I began by asking, why do you love creative writing? What's the difference between a good creative writer and a great creative writer? And he had answers. He talked to me about authenticity and writing from your soul and so on and so forth. And after a long time exploring that, I said, what's the difference between a good leader and a great leader? And he began to answer. And he was, in essence, giving me the same answers that he gave when he discerned between a good creative writer and a great one. And then we explored the consequences of being mediocre versus being excellent. And then we talked about his company and what it meant to live from purpose in his company, in his role at the bottom of the pyramid. And it began to become clear to him that he could live from purpose. Most people never have that conversation. So they go through life living in learned helplessness. What we're talking about today is the process that takes you out of the middle of the curve and puts you on the road less traveled by. And when you go there, you end up living longer, having less disease, having better relationships, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Purpose matters. Every person listening to this talk today can have a better life starting tomorrow by making one simple shift. Clarifying and organizing your life to a higher purpose. It will immediately take you off the path of least resistance and onto the path less traveled by. Well, I promised to take some questions. I assume maybe Tugba, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that right,
Tuba.
that you could maybe facilitate that. I don't know if they've submitted any or, so if you have some questions for me that representing the other folks, please share them and I'll try to answer.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Quinn. It was a very nice presentation. For my curiosity, if the people we are dealing are very stubborn, how can we change them? Because I try to have a higher purpose in my life, but when I'm trying to show the right things to the other people, they were just resisting, and they were insisting to just follow the same path. So what should we do in this case?
That's a great question. That question represents learned helplessness. That is, they always resist. They always resist because it requires courage to be your best self. So they always resist. I once did a study of school teachers, public school teachers, who were in the top 1% of value-added scores in their state. So these were teachers who moved their students 3 years of progress in 1 year. These were teachers who walked on water. Now, I knew before I ever left my office to go interview these teachers that they weren't teachers. They were transformational leaders. See, a transformational leader is someone who helps people change their beliefs and their assumptions so that they can grow. That's what these great teachers were doing. Now, when I interviewed those teachers, they said all kinds of things that are inconsistent with what a normal teacher would say. That is, they were speaking from the right side of the curve. And they would say things like, one of the teachers pointed to a desk. She said, there's a little girl that sits in this desk. She's a minority girl. She pointed out the window and said, she lives in that public housing over there in that apartment. Now, every night, there's a new man in that apartment. And she doesn't know what that new man's going to do to her. Now, you tell me how to teach a girl living in those conditions. How does she learn? And man, I thought that's a significant challenge. And then that teacher said to me, that's my job. My job is to reach every child and transform them. That's not an excuse. You see, I talk to young assistant professors in the business school and they say, oh, I can't teach these people. They want an MBA. All they want's a job. They don't want to learn anything. I can't teach them. Or public school teachers, oh, the children I have, they're from that minority. They don't want to learn. I can't teach them. Well, what's your job? Your job is to create the love of learning in those people, all of them. An ordinary person in a role of professor or public school teacher doesn't believe that. An extraordinary person does believe it. Well, there's a world of difference. Now, have you ever had a great teacher? Did that great teacher make a difference in your life? It was a very different difference than the ordinary teachers made. That's what purpose is calling us to do. And people operating without purpose are the people you're describing. They're afraid. They're insecure. They're resistant. Our job is to help them become who they really are. And it starts by you and I knowing and living from our purpose.
Okay, thank you very much. So, Çiğdem Hoca, would you like to ask a question? She is our assistant professor.
Thank you, Tuğba Hocam. Professor Quinn, this was such a meaningful and such a valuable presentation. I really do appreciate that you shared it with us. And I am so much honored to know you. I just want to give an example. We had a couple of research papers together with my colleague, and we were trying to investigate the background stories of social entrepreneurs. So the things that you explain fit those people quite well. The things that you mentioned about considering the greatest challenges that we had and also our greatest successes. So our potential will be based on not only one, but both of them. And this is realistic because if you don't have any obstacles, if you don't have any difficulties, you don't have the chance to develop or grow. So this is the case. And for the last slide that you shared with us, it kind of reflects the start of my professional experience, let me say, because I was never willing to become a banking person, but there was an economic crisis. And although I was not willing to, I applied and I started as a bank reporting person. And this was never my job. And I was there like 5.5 years. And after that, I quit. And when I quit, I was kind of a manager, and it was, giving me some, monetary rewards, etc. And everybody looked at me like I was doing something strange. But no, I mean, I always liked studying. I always liked learning things. So becoming an academician was a lot more meaningful for me. And now I can see that not only research, but also teaching, both of these legs or dimensions, let me say, are really meaningful for me. And I am right now reading a book from two Asian authors. I cannot tell the names of them, but it is really pointing to that contribution issue you mentioned. So it is about observing others as not enemies, but rather type of colleagues or friends, let me say, and then contributing. And this is something like without giving consideration to what others think about you, what others, how they interpret what you're doing, etc., etc. So it is about, knowing yourself and having a certain perspective towards other people and contributing what you can. So these things may seem a little different from each other and distant, but I think they have some common points. And I really do think that they are kind of parallel to what you have been talking about. So I just wanted to share these. And I genuinely thank you for your talk.
Thank you. As I listen to your comments, an image comes to my head. One year, we did a professional development workshop at the Academy of Management meeting. So that's for all the business school professors in the world. And the notion was bringing purpose to your academic career. Now, in designing the workshop, we assumed that the audience would be doctoral students. When we got into the room was packed, but half the people in the room were professors. And some of those professors were people I knew who were from prestigious universities, who had big resumes with lots of publications. And I basically said, "Why are you here?" And they said, "Well, I'm very successful. I'm tenured, but I'm not happy." So the point is that finding purpose, no matter what stage we're in or what kind of work we're doing, is absolutely crucial. Now, let me close with one last slide. this is an option for people who are interested in what we've been talking about. There's a link at the bottom. But this is a video. It's about a half an hour long. It starts out kind of slow. It's not a very slick professional video. It's a man interviewing the woman whose purpose statement is to fly kites. And she basically tells her story of being cynical about purpose. And then the story gets more and more and more interesting. She tells how she found a purpose. She tells how it altered her life. She talks about during COVID, how she led in the corporation different than all the other leaders. She has a boss who's full of flaws. When she describes them, they sound very serious and lead you to think she's going to say X, but she doesn't. She says, why? She says, I just ignore his flaws. They don't bother me. And that is just stunning. This is a woman that is different than other people because she found a purpose. So on this slide, I've got 8 questions in those blue boxes that you could ask yourself and prepare as you watch that video. It will give you a lot of insights about finding purpose and about the power of purpose. It's just one quick way to get yourself started. But I will conclude by saying it is a delight to be on the other side of the planet talking to you about a topic that I deeply believe in, a topic that I think makes all the difference. I believe that every 18-year-old student entering every university should be taking a course in purpose finding. It should guide their entire academic career. I think that every faculty member should be able to state their purpose and show how they organize their teaching, their research, their administration to that purpose. When we do that, the world begins to change. And it's my hope that the hour we spent together today leads your world to change. So thank you very, very much for your kind attention, and I wish you the very best.
Okay, can we take a couple more questions, or what would you like to do? Because we were supposed to ask more questions.
Okay.
Is it possible?
Why don't we take one? We're over time.
Okay.
But let's take one question and then we'll close.
Okay, sure. Which one should I give? Because all my students are expecting, you know. Then I will be asking the question. So, what are your suggestions for researchers in organizational theory subjects, and which areas could be important for future researchers?
State it one more time.
What kind of research areas would you suggest to us?
Okay.
For the professors, yeah.
All right. At the University of Michigan, for many years, when the new doctoral students arrived, they had to spend 3 hours with me. That was one of their assignments the first few weeks when they arrived. In those 3 hours, I did things that shocked them. Number one, I asked them to tell me the core stories of their lives. That is, the stories that formed their identity. Now that, they weren't used to that, but they told their stories. After they told their stories, we analyzed those stories for clues about their purpose. In the second session, they had to do some preparation. Now, all of them had to write an essay in order to get into the doctoral program. And in the essay, they would say, I'm interested in topic X. And I've done this kind of work on it. Now, typically what that means is that in a master's program someplace, they did research with some professor who was an expert in topic X. And they worked on it because they had a relationship with him. So now they believe that that was what they were interested in. And so the second assignment was to go to 5 A-level journals, read the abstracts for the last 5 years, and identify the abstracts of those journal articles that most excite you. And you have to come back with 30 abstracts. And so they would come back. And then each person had to do a sorting process, putting the abstracts in piles and talking out loud about what they thought those piles were about. At the end of the exercise, I would ask the students to consider one student and share their insights with me about the connections between week 1 and week 2. When they told their core stories and they shared the abstracts that they were passionate about, what connections did they see? Now, that conversation was astounding to each student because almost never was the topic they said they were interested in their real interest. The third week, they had to draw a solar system. On the sun, they had to write one word, the one word they were most interested in. On the first planet, the second most interesting word. And they had a total of 8 words. Now that exercise had profound impact because suddenly the doctoral student can tell you in one word their greatest passion in terms of research. When you know that, finding research questions that really matter becomes very easy. In fact, research becomes easier because now you're focusing all the things you do on the things you're passionate about. You're living your purpose in doing your research. When you get to the end of your life and look at your resume, you've got a lot of publications on that resume that give you 0 energy. You have a few publications that you still feel excited about. The challenge in your life is to be able to make that differentiation beforehand, not afterwards. When you know your purpose and it drives your research agenda, I guarantee you that you'll have a more successful career as a researcher, as a teacher, and in anything else you do. So that's how I would recommend finding research questions.
Okay, thank you very much. And then, of course, our students became unhappy not to ask the question, but our vice rector is going to make our closing speech. Thank you very much for joining our webinar. It was an honor for us to host you, and we would like to see you in Turkey, in Istanbul, whenever you want.
Thank you very, very much.
Elçin Hoca, would you like to make the closing comments?
I also want to thank Professor Quinn for this valuable webinar opportunity. Thank you very much. As you know, we have the 27th of this Science and Society meetings, and last 9 or 10 of them are about on topics on business. We have so many important guests, but honestly, Professor Quinn gave us so many important tips, and I also want to thank him for those valuable tips and valuable comments. Your suggestions is not just only important for our students, you also give so many important suggestions for us also, to find the right path to achieve our goals in our life and how to be happy. You show the first step, maybe the first step, how to be happy in our life. Thank you very much. really. And also I want to thank you for this presentation, and also I want to invite you to our university when you are available as well. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Karabulut, and thank you, Professor Quinn.
Yeah, thank you very much to all our participants, and we would like to see you, Professor Quinn, whenever you want. It's our pleasure
Thank you.
to meet with you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Take care.
Best wishes.
Bye-bye.